for joining us today for the BOMA Greater Dallas webinar, COVID-19, How Market Leaders Are Addressing the Shelter-in-Place Order. This is an unprecedented time in the commercial real estate industry and in the world. And like many cities and counties in the United States, Dallas and Collin counties have issued a shelter-in-place order. Today, we're going to discuss how our leaders in the Dallas area commercial real estate industry are addressing these challenges. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn. But before we get started, I want to thank our BOMA Greater Dallas Cornerstone partners for their support. April Building Services, AMST Elevator Interiors, Interstate Restoration, Land Care, and Mooring Construction and Restoration. I also need to let everyone know that this webinar is intended to show how companies are managing this particular crisis situation. We're not setting standard for protocol or recommending any specific course of action, policies, or procedures. BOMA Greater Dallas is presenting this information as a service to our members. While this information is about legal issues, it's not legal advice. Further, due to the rapidly changing nature of the law and the COVID-19 crisis, we recommend you consult with your legal counsel on this issue before you implement or change any policies or procedures. And finally, this session is being recorded so we can share it with members who were unable to join us. Now, on to our discussion. Our panelists today are Cathy Kuebler, Julie Young, and Tony Barbieri. First, Cathy, can you start by telling us a little about yourself, and then we'll have Julie jump in, and then finally Tony.
Sure. I want to thank BOMA Greater Dallas for having me today. Cathy Kuebler, Vice President with Billingsley Company. I'm over the Property Management Office Division and former immediate past president of BOMA Greater Dallas, and now have the fortune of chairing the BOMA Greater Dallas Foundation.
Hi, I'm Julie Young, and I'm the general manager of the Crescent for Crescent Real Estate. And I'm a former Dallas BOMA board member. I resigned when Christine became president-elect in order to be able to support her. Since we worked together, we needed somebody to man the fort while she was out being president of BOMA.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tony Barbieri. I'm a shareholder with law firm of Kessler Collins, and we've represented BOMA Dallas for many, many years, probably too many to recall, but I want to thank you all for letting me be on the panel, and I want to thank you for our sponsors.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Let's get into it. Our first question is for Cathy and Julie. And the question is, how are your companies managing the shelter in place for your organization?
Cathy, do you want to start?
Sure. So these are very stressful times, needless to say. I understand it's stressful for everyone out there, but you know, I can speak for my team, and that is that we are trying to be there for our tenants. I'm fortunate enough to work for an owner, but you know, every one of our tenants is our customer, and they all have different needs. So I think managing the stress is been a top priority, and something that we're all kind of learning as we go day by day. But we're trying to focus on our tenants and focus on our employees, because you know, this will end and we will get back to normal, and we want to be ready for when that happens.
Julie?
We're kind of doing the same thing as Cathy. We started probably 2 weeks ago when we, started ramping up for this. We went to a kind of one team on, one team off approach. Then as it got to shelter in place, we have a small group of engineering on site with the other engineers at home so that we can rotate out so we have continuous coverage. Given the fact that we have a ton of financial customers at our property, we call our tenants customers at the Crescent. It was imperative that we have all the building services available, and we're running so that the people that have to be at work can be at work. And if you hear the bird in the background, that's my parakeet Henry, who's so very excited to be on webinar and wanted everyone to know he's here.
You know, a quick question for you guys. And I know that it's impacted your direct operations employees, but does it impact your accounting or other functions as well? Has it had an impact on that?
Well, I think we're all in a wait and see mode. Since we are nearing the end of the month, we're getting ready to have our first rental payments coming in. I was on a call this morning and was very happy to hear that at one of our developments we already have 61% of the rent that's come in, so that's very encouraging. Just trying to make sure that we can take care of our employees and maintain the assets that we have. We can't stop taking care of them. So the financial part of it is, thank goodness the wheel does look like it's continuing to turn. So,
yeah. Let me ask you another question, both for Cathy and Julie, and then we can get Tony's input on this one as well. How did you determine if your building was going to stay open or if it was going to close, and what did you ultimately decide? I think you may have answered that, but how did you decide that?
So yeah, from the start, we had, when this first started ramping up, we had customers reaching out to us, making sure that we were going to keep the building open because there are so many financial and national firms. So we kind of from the start were like, we're going to, put a plan in place to assure that we can keep it open and we can service our customers, the ones that have to be in the office. So we really never considered closing the building down. We were always with the plan in place to make sure that we could keep the building open and operational.
Good deal.
I do think it's was a little bit of a misnomer from a lot of our tenant standpoint that they were asking, will you close the building? It's really not, unless you have a building that is occupied by a single user. Multi-tenant buildings, we don't just close because we never know. It's not our responsibility to know which of our tenants feel like that they are an essential part of what's going on right now. So we do not close our buildings. We may control access and let people enter that have access cards if that's something that the tenants would like us to do. But as far as closing a building, that just does not happen for us. Let me say that.
Yeah. Tony, you have any thoughts or input on buildings
Yeah,
being open?
actually I do. This issue has caused a lot of confusion over the past couple weeks. And a lot of the confusion is based on the fact that there's so many different laws applicable here. You look at the Metroplex, just the Metroplex alone, and you've got the County of Dallas, you've got Collin County, and you've got multiple municipalities, multiple cities having their own laws. And some of these laws aren't exactly identical. For example, Dallas County and the City of Dallas have a slightly different shelter-in-place law. You magnify that by the fact that a lot of our owners and our tenants have headquarters or operations in other states, particularly in the East Coast or West Coast. There's a lot of confusion because those laws are also different than ours here. But to be clear, in the Metroplex, there is no current law that requires shutting down a building. When I talk about building, I'm talking about the physical structure, okay? There could be an exception to that. For example, if the CDC came down and actually shut down a building because of an outbreak, that would be a different scenario. We have not heard of any confirmed cases about that here in the Metroplex. There were some rumors about it, but I have not found any confirmed cases where actual buildings have been shut down. So the facilities themselves are not legally required to be shut down in the Metroplex, but certain businesses are permitted if they are essential businesses. Others, if they're not essential, are not permitted to operate right now.
Okay. We'll talk a little bit about some of the essential businesses and essential things in a moment here, but I wanted to swing back and ask, Cathy and Julie, that when you made your decision of how you were going to, what you were going to do with your building, how did you communicate with your tenants, and how are you communicating with them on an ongoing basis?
So I think the communication part is key. I mean, I always think communication is so important, but it is just so important right now. We need to be there for our tenants. So my entire team spend a lot of their day reaching out to our tenants. And we're trying to really have phone conversations with them if we can. You know, that's a lot of phone conversations. So yes, we are, you know, utilizing email. But, you know, when you're looking at, we have about 170 tenants, they all need to know they're important. And so we are communicating with our really large tenants, usually every day or every other day. All other tenants we try to communicate with at least weekly.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're sending out mass notifications, and one of the things that I think we did to get ahead of the curve is working with our legal department and a PR firm. We kind of had emails already written up to any situation that came up. We kind of had a stock verbiage that we could use, and then just kind of make it work for the situation, but stuff that we had, so you weren't having to think through and start from scratch. We've been updating our customers at least weekly with a mass email, but then we have reached out to a lot of the, like Cathy said, some of the bigger ones. Over the last 2 days, I personally emailed every single one of my customers at the Crescent, which is 125 of them, with my cell phone number and how to get a hold of us. And I feel like we've actually taken a horrible situation and made it into a positive, because we have been so high touch with our customers.
Yeah, that's really important, and something you guys are doing a really great job. Let's go back to talk about some of the essential businesses and essential services. This is for Tony. Tony, the city of Dallas just required buildings in the city limits to post the declaration of who can be in the buildings. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and what, now that that requirement to post has been made known, what buildings should be doing?
Yeah, so good question. This is a ordinance that's specific to the city of Dallas. So please keep that in mind. If you have buildings that are outside the city of Dallas, there may be a different restriction or a different notice requirement for you. But what most buildings are doing is they're going to all the access points, whether it's from the street or whether it's from underneath a garage or what have you, and they're posting the applicable signs or the applicable regulations, either taping it to the door or they're putting it in sleeves and taping that to the door. I have had a lot of clients and friends of BOMA or BOMA members who are asking me or concerned that people might see that sign and think that the entire building is closed. And as we just talked about, the buildings themselves are not closing. The one thing that you can do is you can post a sign that specifically says that the building itself is still open. So even though you have to comply with the city's posting requirements about which businesses may not occupy, you can still post a notice to clarify that the building itself is still open.
Okay. I want to throw another one your way. For buildings that, and we'll talk about, we'll get a little bit more in depth on this, but the buildings that say don't have essential businesses and are not generally open to the public, are those property management staff still allowed to be at the building to perform services?
Yeah, so the way the laws are working here, and in Dallas, in the city of Dallas, Dallas County, and also Collin County, they have what they've deemed to be essential businesses. And again, not all of these jurisdictions have defined essential business to be the same, but all the jurisdictions are consistently stating that the actual operation of the building itself is something that could be a mandated function per the Department of Health and per the Homeland Security Department that requires certain infrastructure services to be open. And so a building, perhaps you don't have any essential services or essential businesses in your facility. You can still keep the building open, so to speak, from a operation standpoint, meaning you can still go in and perform maintenance. You can still go in and perform housekeeping. You still have security to your building. In fact, we're recommending to our clients that even if you have no tenants occupying your building, you should still go in and perform these essential services just for the safety and care of the building itself.
Okay. So what's the property manager's role in determining whether or not a tenant's business is essential? And then also, do they have a responsibility to provide access to any other services?
Well, the property, and this is again a question that we're getting a lot, but no jurisdictions in the Metroplex are requiring property managers or owners or even security personnel to make a decision about whether or not an essential business is actually an essential business. In other words, as a property manager or owner, you do not have an obligation to check to see if the people coming in and out of your building, your tenants, are actually providing essential services. That's not your initiative. That's not your requirement. If in fact somebody is not sheltering in place, for example, in Dallas County, if you are not sheltering in place and you have no legal reason to be out and about, then you can be fined and you can be cited. So it's really no different from any other activity that you would see in the building that you may think is illegal. If you have someone coming into your building that you don't think should be in there because you don't think they're providing essential services, then your duty, so to speak, or your options would be to do what any other possible criminal act you would do in that situation. So you would call the police or you would call code enforcement. I don't think I call the police in this scenario, but what most property managers are doing, if they really are concerned about it, is they're calling a code enforcement. And we have had situations the past couple of days where code enforcement has showed up at various buildings to talk to tenants to see if they're actually supposed to be there or not. And that takes the onus off of the property manager to have to make that decision.
Okay, that's good. Getting a little deeper into it, for Cathy and Julie, how are you addressing janitorial when there is a COVID case or a suspected COVID-19 case in your building?
Julie, you want to take this one?
Sure. So I will say from the onset, we talked to our janitorial provider as well as a restoration company about what services they offer and how we would go about them, and even get some pricing in advance. So we kind of had stuff for the ready should something come up. We actually then have, a procedure in place to come in if there is a suspected or a confirmed case, to thoroughly clean and disinfect that space, and as well as kind of common areas and path of travel, so we know if there was an affected employee of one of our customers, how they get to work, where they park, so that we're kind of covering the whole place as we get them, as we do the disinfecting and the cleaning.
Okay.
One thing I will add is that, I think our janitorial vendors have and their employees have been incredible through this whole thing. We are working really hard. We don't have a lot of people in some of our buildings, and we do want to try to keep as many people employed as we possibly can. So in some cases, because our day staff are usually full-time employees and our night staff are part-time employees, in some cases we are having the buildings not cleaned at night, and we are allowing our day staff to do that cleaning so we can keep them employed. That said, we want to protect everyone. So if we do hear one that has a case or a confirmed case or even a suspected case of COVID-19, we absolutely let our janitorial teams know, and the other people in the building also.
Yeah, Cathy makes a really good point. Something that we started from the very beginning is that we were going to be totally transparent with our staff, with our vendors, and with our tenants, customers. That we've told them we will let you know. When we know something, you'll know something, and just keeping that transparency and making sure that they feel like we're being completely honest, and they know the situation as much as we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Tony, from a legal perspective, do building owners have a responsibility to notify the tenants when they learn that someone in the office has been tested positive for COVID-19? Or is there language that has to be used when notifying the tenants of a positive COVID-19 case?
There is no current law that says that you have to notify your other tenants if someone in the building or a service provider tests positive. But there are a couple other things to keep in mind. One is just a human factor. There's a lot of talk about, and rightfully so, about civic duty here, and everyone doing what's best for themselves and for the communities especially. And so from that perspective, it is a good idea to notify the tenants if there is some contamination in the building. As far as other legal duties, there could be a situation where I liken this to and I don't want to I don't want to alarm anybody, but it's very similar to if there were a hazardous material situation in the premises. You would want to notify the occupants of the situation so that they can take all the proper safety protocols. And so from that perspective, I would definitely notify all your occupants that there has been contamination at the building. As far as the specific notice requirement, there is none expressed, but you should definitely provide prompt notice to everybody. Earlier, we had a question about how are you communicating with the tenants. I think we had some really good responses. So I would definitely use those same methods to communicate the message that there is contamination at the building, and get that out to the tenants as soon as possible. I would not identify who is contaminated as far as a specific person. I would even be very, very cautious about identifying who the actual tenant was that had the employee. It's not necessary to divulge that information, but you should tell everybody that there's contamination and that they need to take precautions. Once that building has been contaminated, the CDC has a pretty good protocol for what you have to do as far as cleaning your buildings, and from a timing perspective of when people should not come back into the building. I'm not going to go into that now, but as a shameless plug, if you go to the BOMA website, there are links out there for all these guidelines from the CDC, and they're actually very helpful on this topic as far as what to specifically do as far as the response.
Okay. Well, I kind of touched on this, but I wanted to ask you the question kind of straight out. Whose responsibility is it for sanitizing a tenant's space when there's a positive test? And then what about if it happens in a common area?
Yeah, so a lot of this is going to depend on what your lease language says, and if you really think about it, it's again, and I don't want to alarm anybody by equating coronavirus to hazardous materials spill, but if you think about it, if a tenant spilled something in their premises, most of your leases will require the tenant to clean that up. Most of the leases also require the landlord to have oversight to make sure that it is properly cleaned. So, for example, if someone's premises was contaminated, meaning they had an employee or employees who tested positive who were in the premises, and as you've probably heard, this virus can live on plastics and metals for a certain period of time. Like I said, there are protocols to make sure that the premises is properly cleaned. So if the tenant is responsible for cleaning their premises, then they should do so. As a landlord, your lease probably provides, and if it doesn't provide, you should do it anyway. You can ensure that they follow the proper protocols and made sure that the premises was properly cleaned. On the common areas, ordinarily the landlord is responsible for cleaning the common areas. So if something does occur, then you should take the steps necessary to clean it based on the appropriate guidelines. the question then becomes, if it's a common area expense, is a common area cleaning, is that expense able to be passed through to the tenants, right? That's obviously the big question. And that's going to depend largely on your leases. Most leases state that if there is some type of hazardous material or bio waste type of cleanup in the premises, the leases will dictate whether or not that can be passed through to the tenant. So that's going to be a lease by lease, a case by case basis based on your lease. So unfortunately, you might have to actually dig through your leases to figure out what they say.
Okay.
So I will tell you, at Billingsley, we are, we kind of are following the guidelines of stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 cleaning. So our janitorial vendors are handling stage 1 and stage 2. And then the stage 3 and 4 cleaners, we are normally having those done by our emergency restoration companies. And as far as, you know, who is responsible for cleaning them, we have found that it's much easier to be able to help our tenants. If they do have a confirmed case of COVID-19, we can give them recommendations of various companies that we already have certificates of insurance on file for. It just makes things happen much faster. And because even if a tenant does hire someone to come in, we still need a COI for it. So we're trying to, again, service our tenants and give them some options and some choices. And then we normally ask that the tenant, if they have a confirmed case, we recommend that they do stage 4 cleaning. Stage 3 cleaning then is done in all the common areas, restrooms, stairwells, elevators, to make sure that, you know, we're protecting the other people in the building too.
Cathy, and you have all those stages that are set. So is there a specific protocol that you're going to use before you actually kind of reopen to everyone?
So that's a really good question, because we've all been talking about that. BOMA International did a webinar. I haven't had an opportunity to see the recorded version yet, and it filled up real quickly. And their title for the webinar was talking about, you know, getting people back into the buildings. Mm-hmm. Kind of going back to the fact that the building never closes, I don't foresee us having to do any really large overhauls of anything. The buildings are going to be maintained. They're going to be clean. The HVAC systems are on. Now we have, during this situation, on the buildings where we have increased the percentage of outside air to help just the ventilation and in the buildings. Mm-hmm. So that has continued and will continue until we get recommendations that, you know, we can go back to our normal operation. But as far as how we prepare the buildings for people to come back into them, you know, I'm going to hope that our buildings are running efficiently and they're clean. And, you know, we still have our engineer team that are working diligently, rotating day in and day out to make sure that the buildings are operating properly. So I just don't really see that we're going to be doing anything that special unless we were to have a real serious situation with contamination. Julie, what do you think?
Yeah, Cathy, we're the same, doing the same protocol. To us, we're preparing the building for people to come into it every single day. We're still cleaning it at night. We've still got the full set of day porters that's going through common areas all day long. And so as far as I'm concerned, I prepare my building every single day and night for the next day for my customers to go into it. My engineering team is on site. We've added outside air as well, where, you know, it is the highest capacity we can. And, you know, we're just continuing on. So yeah, it's every day it's open.
Yeah. Let's look at a different area. We know that times are really tough right now and everybody's having to make difficult decisions. And many of our tenants are taking or feel they're taking a financial hit due to having the shelter-in-place restrictions. What are you, Cathy and Julie, doing to help reduce operating expenses or manage operating expenses?
We've really been doing a deep dive into that with our asset managers since last week, trying to figure out exactly what we can do for our tenants to reduce their operating expenses, because the majority of our leases are triple net, so it's passed right back through to the tenants. We want to be good landlords. We want to be good stewards of their CAMs that they pay every month. And so we're going to be reforecasting and hopefully have some reforecasted numbers for them for their May statement. But the janitorial reduction, we're trying to figure out if we don't have people, a full building, are there areas that we can cut back on HVAC? That's our biggest, drainer of our electricity. Just really any and everything, line item by line item. If there's something even that we can defer, if the buildings don't have people in them right now, there may be things that, we can defer until this crisis, is over or close to over.
And Julie can jump in on this too, but on the HVAC cutbacks, are you doing any special notifications to your tenants, or you're just making those decisions and putting them in play?
So we have asked our tenants to let us know if they are working or if they have a small crew working, and as it changes, we had tenants that started out having a team A and a team B, and after the first week decided that everybody would work remote. But we do have people coming in every day. So we've been adjusting it kind of based on the occupancy of each floor. And a lot of what we've been doing is even just reducing the time that we're running the AC, knowing that when people are working remote, they're not there from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. like we usually run it. We've also asked, we had a lot of our law firm and customers that automatically had after hours air, that it was just, they always did it. So we've reached out to everybody that had that and asked them, clearly you're not using your after hours air, can we shut it off? So again, looking at that, along with all of our other expenses, our elevator contract, our power washing, our landscape, we're cutting out some of the seasonal color. And we're not just looking 60 days out, but the rest of the year. What is it, do we have something budgeted in October that we can do in 21 in order to realize that this could be a longer situation for our customers and harder financially on our customers? So just being good stewards, both of our landlords' money and of our tenants' money.
Yeah, and obviously you and your teams are doing a lot to reduce operating costs and communicate that to the tenant. What would you both say that vendors can do to help you in this situation?
Well, I think Cathy feels the same way as me, and she can jump in. To us, all of the vendors that we use are our partners. They're our partners in our buildings, and we want them to be successful just as we want to be successful. But realizing that, that times are changed and things are difficult, and that we have not only landlords that it can be difficult for, but our customers. So we are reaching out to them and asking their help. And what do you think we could cut down, or what, making some hard decisions with them, knowing that it's a long-term partnership and it will continue to be a partnership when this is all over.
So generally speaking, are you getting any pushback from are you seeing pushback just in general from any vendors, or are you getting good cooperation with your efforts?
Well, we're getting, our partnerships are solid, and I'm very proud of the relationships that we have and the feedback we're getting from our vendor partners. They are working with us. We are all having to make some really, really hard decisions right now. And, you know, this is not where any of us want to be. But at the end of the day, as I've said, you know, this will end, and we will all come out of this stronger. But, you know, there are sacrifices that everyone's having to make right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Cathy. My next question has to do more from a tenant perspective or a landlord perspective. And I want to get Tony's input as well as Cathy and Julie's. How are you addressing rent issues? Are you having tenants asking for rent reduction and rent abatements? And the Tony side of the question is, Tony, does force majeure play into this?
So force majeure is something that you're hearing a lot about right now. And again, there's a lot of confusion about how these force majeure clauses play into the lease. But it's typical, the force majeure concept is a contractual issue that's going to be lease by lease. So a lot of leases, most landlord-friendly leases, if they're just signed by the tenant as is, do not provide any force majeure help for the tenant. I know when we negotiate leases for our landlord clients, if the tenant asks for some relief from force majeure, we typically exclude out their obligation, their financial obligation. So in other words, if a lease, you have to check your lease to see if it gives a tenant any force majeure relief, and if so, does it allow them to have force majeure relief with respect to paying rent. And then you have to see if the force majeure language, the definition of force majeure, includes something that could be related to the COVID-19 virus. So, for example, if it just says, you have force majeure for strikes and riots and shortages of supplies and whatnot, it's probably not going to apply to the situation. But if the force majeure language says that the tenant doesn't have to pay rent if there are any pandemics or epidemics that directly affect the premises, then they're going to probably have the right to hold back paying rent. I'm sorry. The rest of the question was.
Well, the rest of the question really is, I wanted to hear from Cathy and Julie if they're having tenants ask for rent reductions and abatements, and how are they addressing those requests?
So we have started receiving some. We have quite a few retail tenants at Billingsley. We have over 50 restaurant establishments in the Metroplex, and they're being hit very hard. I think that across the board, what I can say is that we do want to be good partners with our tenants. And so we are looking at them on a case-by-case basis to see, what we can do to help, to see, what kind of financial hardships that the company may be incurring.
So we too have we've heard from mostly so far our retail customers, because they have been the hardest hit. So I am interested, though, after what Tony was saying, if he thinks now going forward that force majeure will become a bigger part of the lease negotiation process, given that the language, when I read the language, it doesn't really call out that for most of them. So do you think that's going to become much more of an issue?
Oh, yeah. I mean, these force majeure clauses are going to be definitely hotly negotiated starting immediately. We have leases that are in negotiation right now that have been ongoing. And so the tenants are coming back saying, don't sign anything. We want to revisit this force majeure issue. So it's really coming back. And it's going to be something, if for those of you who were in the business, post 9/11, there's all this language about, anti-terrorism and what happens if there's a terrorist attack. And that was hotly negotiated. And so now this is going to be equally as hotly negotiated. So yes, there's going to be a lot of webinars and seminars about how to address this issue. And there's going to be a lot of lawsuits about how these issues are interpreted. I will, if I could add one other comment, a lot of my landlord clients, when their tenants are coming to them asking for relief or rent abatement, my clients are asking the tenants to kind of give them some insight as to what they're doing to mitigate the damages on their end. So for example, the landlords are saying, well, look, we don't want you to just come and get a rent haircut and then just keep making distributions to all the owners, and we want everyone to feel the pain here. So if the landlord's going to feel the pain, we want to see what else the tenant is doing to mitigate the risk on their side. For example, did the tenant cut distributions to the owners? Did the tenant go out to their lender and ask the lender to take a haircut or to take an abatement of the loan payments? What has the tenant done with their other top vendors? And so by doing that, you, as a landlord, you can kind of ensure that you're not being picked on, and you can also help ensure that the tenant is getting enough relief so that they can make it through this, or be in the best position they can be to make it through this downturn, so they can then come back and hopefully continue to pay rent.
Tony, I have another kind of tenant question for you, the landlord tenant. Oddly enough, of course, we're going to have tenants who are supposed to move out during this period of shelter in place. How do we go about completing those move outs?
Yeah, so the move outs themselves can still be conducted. So can the actual move itself, because the Homeland Security defines building infrastructure and operation of buildings, including office buildings, including warehouse buildings, retail buildings. That is an essential infrastructure component of how our country operates. And so when you've got issues like, do you continue to maintain the building? Yes. Can you have tenants move in and move out? Yes. Can you still have walkthroughs? Yes. So all those things can still occur. However, you have to keep in mind that in a lot of municipalities like Dallas County and the city of Dallas, you have to have social distancing. You cannot be more than 6 feet from another person, and they recommend that no more than 10 people gather in the same place. So it might be a little awkward, or it might be a little strained, but you can still do your move-ins and your move-outs. But you should comply with these social distancing rules and recommendations.
Okay. Makes it difficult.
That does.
Let me ask a question of Cathy and Julie. I really would like to hear, what challenges do you expect to face when the tenants begin to reoccupy their spaces?
Well, I think that I think for all of us, it's just going to be a matter of getting back to normal. I think we're defining the new normal right now, and I'll be curious to see kind of what this does to working remotely. I've heard pros and cons from people. I've never been a fan of working remotely. I feel like I'm not as efficient when I'm home, and so this has been a kind of a challenge to me. But I will be curious to see if we have tenants that start allowing more of their workforce to work from home. I have had emails from tenants asking, what kind of concert we could do and what kind of party we could throw to celebrate when this thing is all over. So we definitely look forward to that. But I think that the main challenge is going to be just helping everyone kind of get back into the groove.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to what Cathy said. I think it's, I think the work from home, I think it's made people realize how much they want to be in the office. And like Cathy, we've already been telling our customers, we're working on our celebration and we all are back. Excuse me.
Let's see. Well, I want to ask you guys, other than the stay at home and wash your hands recommendation, what advice do you have for our real estate community?
Cathy, I'll start. First of all, because we talked about our poor little restaurant customers, that it's Friday night. So my husband and I this morning decided we were going to go get Mexican from our favorite little Mexican restaurant and eat it at home, which will probably save us a lot of calories because I'm sure they'll only give us so many chips. But for the people who know me have worked with me for years and years, my whiteboard in my office or on my computer or anywhere in my office, it always says E plus R equals O, which is an event plus reaction equals outcome. You can never control the event. You can only control your reaction, and your reaction is really what determines the outcome. So different trying times, but I think if we always remember just, what is your reaction to make the best outcome? That's all we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We've got to figure out a way to smile. We've got to figure out a way to bring humor to our group. We've got to figure out a way to be there especially for our teams. So, yeah, I think that's critical.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for answering all of the questions. I think there might have been one other question that I had, and it kind of goes back to the front. So, Tony, just to clarify something you said earlier with posting, that required posting in the city of Dallas is for office buildings, retail, all buildings, correct?
That's correct. The signage postage requirements are for all buildings, including retail buildings. If you have a retail property, let's just say a big shopping mall, you would be required to post the notice at the common entrances. If the tenants themselves have an outside door, it's their responsibility to post that notice. To answer the question about how we're dealing with it, I don't know if I have a sign here that we prepared, but this is the motto that we're using in our law firm and that we're using with a lot of our clients and friends. I don't know if you guys can see it. Moving on. Okay. I mean, you said it earlier. We have to, we can't lose sight of the fact that we can all pull through this and get together. We can't lose, we can't give up on humor, and we still have to keep fighting through. But if we do all the things that we've been talking about, we will all get through this. So let's do it.
Thank you, Tony. Keep calm and COVID on.
Right. That's right.
Tony, Cathy, Julie, thank you all for your time today. We also want to thank everyone for joining us and for everyone who submitted questions. Unfortunately, we were not able to cover all your questions. However, I encourage you to reach out to your legal counsel if you need assistance. Again, I want to thank our panelists, Cathy, Julie, and Tony, for your time and for sharing such great information. And also many thanks to our cornerstone partners, April Building Services, AMST Elevator Interiors, Interstate Restoration, Land Care, Mooring Construction and Restoration. Finally, we know there is so much information that you need, so we'll be having a weekly webinar on topics related to COVID-19. So just stay tuned for more information. It'll be available in your e-voice and in this week's events, and even by special emails. So take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.